right, good afternoon. Welcome to NCIA's Industry Essentials webinar, Unlocking Compliance, Understanding Cannabis Marketing Regulations, part of our Committee Insight series. I'm Brian Gilbert, NCIA's Director of Engagement and Experience, and I'm really excited to have you all here as we explore essential strategies to ensure your cannabis marketing efforts remain both effective and compliant with industry regulations. Today's session is led by members of our Marketing and Advertising Committee who have put together an incredible program that covers everything from avoiding deceptive practices to understanding social media policies, making compliant environmental claims, and much, much more. Before we dive into these critical topics, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Maria Calabrese, CEO of BeneLeaves. Maria is a passionate advocate for cannabis education and founder of BeneLeaves, a pioneering streaming platform that promotes transparency in green living. Her personal journey from skeptic to a staunch advocate was inspired by her own experiencing overcoming chronic pain through cannabis, which led to her dedication to providing reliable information to others. Maria, great to have you here. I'm really excited for you to lead today's conversation. With that, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our esteemed panel.
Oh, Brian, thank you. And thank you to the National Cannabis Industry Association for all the hard work you do, and Brian for putting this together, and everyone for joining us today. We've got a great panel, as Brian mentioned, and I'm happy to introduce myself, Maria Calabrese, founder of BeneLeaves Media Platform, and the rest of the panel. We're going to be joined by legal experts, Helen McMurray and Walter Chad Blackham from McMurray and Shuster, and Emilie Kelleher, who is the Vice President of BeneLeaves Marketing. And Emilie has a couple of distinctions, but I'm going to have them all fill you in on their backgrounds, as well as being the Vice President for BeneLeaves of Business and Government Affairs. She is also the Marketing Chair for the Ohio Cannabis Coalition. I thought it would be nice for each of them to introduce themselves personally, talk a little bit, guys, about your expertise. And I mean, I think one of the most fascinating things, we do have to unlock compliance, yes, but I'm always interested to learn how experts like this have come to the cannabis space. So Helen, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been practicing law almost 40 years now, and about 7 years ago, you don't think in your legal career you're going to get to actually open up into something that's never been done before, but sure enough, you know, Ohio passes medical marijuana, and we ended up getting a lot of the litigation that came out of the set-aside program, and so we worked to try to defend that program and allow our clients to get their licenses, which they did. But we work in heavily regulated industries, kind of on the consumer protection screen, if you will. Our firm was founded by the Attorney General of Ohio, and a number of us that have worked for her. I served as a regulator under the Attorney General. I headed up the consumer protection section, and probably most analogous to this industry, worked, for example, on the Attorney General lawsuit against the tobacco industry. And even though that was 20 years ago, we're finding now that a lot of the same kind of claims that were struck down with regards to tobacco, cartoon characters, you know, using things that look like kids' candy or those types of things, are now popping up in this industry. For the last 20 years, I've been focusing basically just on helping companies comply with advertising, and have spent, I think, 3 years now on the marketing committee here. And you're going to be hearing all about the advertising guidelines that our firm wrote, and now we're trying to roll them out to you so they'll be useful.
That's fantastic. And I say this with all due respect. Every time I read something about unlocking compliance, the patchwork of inconsistent laws and reconciling state with federal has been referred to as kind of dysfunctional laws. And I love talking to you and Chad, because everybody, this is not going to be dry today. I could say they're lovely. They put the fun in dysfunction. No, I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. All right, Chad, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background?
Well, it's going to be hard to live up to it after Helen and that glowing introduction, Maria, but thank you so much. My name is Chad Blackham. I have the singular honor of working with Helen McMurray at the law firm McMurray and Shuster. We had the extraordinary opportunity to get involved with Ohio's medical marijuana system back in 2018, have been in it since its transition to a non-medical or adult use market in the last year. And we've also branched out into a couple of other states with our national practice. As Helen mentioned, we operate in a lot of really highly complex niche areas. So the transition to the cannabis industry was kind of a natural segue for us, with a lot of our marketing and advertising bona fides carrying over. So we bring a really unique kind of perspective to this, and I hope everyone here will learn a lot for your own marketing and advertising activities. In addition to working with Helen, I am also a board member with the Natural Therapies Education Foundation, a education-focused nonprofit for medical marijuana. And I'm also a professor at Capital Law School, where I teach their cannabis law and policy class.
That's fantastic. I'm just curious, when did the university start allowing these types of classes?
Wonderful question, Maria. This year, actually, I'm the very first to develop and teach the course.
All right. Well, we're surrounded by pioneers. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chad. So, Emilie, you're going to talk to us about how this all applies in actual business operations and the importance of it.
Man, yeah, so my journey, I would say it's unique, but the more that I learn about others and just my colleagues in the industry, we all kind of share similar stories on our whys. I've never been in an industry that had so many just incredibly passionate human beings. The kindness, the humanization of the industry has just been incredible to watch. But I got in as an advocate on the medicinal side of things, plant medicine based, and worked out in Colorado. Moved back here and actually opened the first retail space in Central Ohio in Columbus, and did dispensary retail. And I've now been with BeneLeaves going on my 3rd year, just doing marketing, advertising. Obviously I work the governmental affairs side of things as well. But as we all know, we all wear 1.5 million hats in this business, given the day of the week. So, but thank you so much for having me, and it's lovely to be here.
Well, your insights are going to be, Helen and Chad are going to set the table for the legal landscape. And then your insights are going to be invaluable for aligning compliance with actual business growth, if such a thing is possible. We're all trying. So as Brian was very good at giving a lot of information about my background, so I'll just say a little bit about what I hope to do today is to contribute insights from the media perspective. And I'm going to speak to the unique challenges in balancing visibility with compliance, right? So particularly in digital advertising, where cannabis ads are heavily restricted on platforms as, Google, Facebook. But there are tips I've learned along the way on how to work with compliance while maximizing impact across advertising and marketing channels, including social media. All right, so without further ado, I think we have to understand the rules of the road. So I'm going to hand it over to Helen and Chad, and we're going to start with the framework for marketing and advertising compliance.
Great. Thank you so much, Maria. Well, one of the things that I realized, especially serving on the marketing committee for NCIA, was that nobody realized that there are advertising laws that apply to cannabis beyond the ones that are coming out of, like in Ohio, we have a division of cannabis control. And unfortunately, there is a substantial body of law at the state, federal, and sometimes even local level that does apply to everything that's being sold to consumers, even medical marijuana, recreational cannabis, and the like. And so the compliance guidelines that I referenced before are really just a kind of very high overview. So you know that they are out there. And I know we've got at least one marketing person on and a bunch of operators, so that you know generally what's to be expected, because there's a little commonality between the states and the federal laws. And then later on in today's presentation, we'll get into the specifics. And so what I wanted to talk about first was what we call UDAP, which is an unfair or deceptive act or practice. And so if you are selling a product to a consumer, you are not allowed to make unfair, deceptive acts or practices or any claims that are abusive. One of the problems with this law, and it's the state law as well as the federal law, is that it's very subjective. So there's not going to be a book that's going to tell you what phrases you can use to describe your product and which ones you can't. You basically have to kind of use your common sense, work with legal professionals like our firm that has experience in understanding all of this. But I think we're all consumers too, right? So when we're making a claim and it's not particularly clear, or that there's things that you're excluding, that could potentially be deceptive. And so those are the things that you have to watch out for. The state laws and the federal law is enforced by the Federal Trade Commission. The state law is generally enforced by the state attorney general. And both of those enforcers have taken actions against cannabis companies in the last 5 years. And so you want to be concerned that when you are putting messages out there, that not only are they true, okay, but that you are clearly and conspicuously disclosing, any limitations at all. And that can be about your product, or it could be about the purchasing of the product. Are you not disclosing the fact that you're selling something? And this could apply, for example, also to CBD products, but then there's a shipping fee, there's a handling fee, there's a credit card fee, those types of things as well. So that's kind of the general framework that we're looking at in terms of these consumer protection laws. And the remedies are really steep. $25,000 civil penalty, most states, a little bit higher at the federal level, and that's per transaction. So if you're selling thousands of items to people or making millions of phone calls or text messages, and we'll talk about them in a little bit too, that's a multiplier of $25,000. And you can also be enjoined by a court. A court can stop you from selling your product. A court can stop you from making those claims. So really, and those are what the attorneys general and the FTC have done in the last 5 years or so. Chad, you want to add on to that?
Absolutely. So Helen, you touched on a couple of really important points. I think the most scary and potentially also the most important, though, are some of those penalties you talked about. Something that's really interesting about cannabis, we're all aware of the federal prohibition. We're all aware of the supremacy issues and the dual legality at the federal and state level. But what's interesting, and a lot of people might not know, is that the federal government and state officials have actually gone after cannabis companies quite a bit, notwithstanding that dichotomy. We'll talk a bit about it more later, but some of the specific areas that they're focusing on include things like health claims. And when we're talking about marketing and advertising here, I want to touch on something Helen mentioned at the outset as well, which is this applies to pretty much any statement your business is making. Audio, visual, in the newspaper, in email, on a social media blog post. Really, any type of output a consumer might see is influenced by this. So we have a couple specific examples here, things like packaging and imagery considerations. Helen made that great point about avoiding cartoons or images that target children, as well as specific state advertising rules. But we also have something called constructive notice. And what happens is when a violation is found on a local level, it goes into a state repository. We have a notice with the Attorney General here, and then that puts all other businesses on notice of that specific violation. What this means is in your particular state, in the case of Ohio, for instance, there might be dozens or even hundreds of other type of UDAP violations that aren't in the revised code, aren't in the administrative code, and aren't really readily available if you don't know where to look. But that doesn't mean you don't have to follow them. So there's a lot of rules and regulations you have to follow here, and they apply to all activities you do. And the last thing I'll touch on before turning it over again is that enforcement issue. These state UDAP laws, and when you hear UDAP, I want you to think of it as synonymous with consumer protection. One of the reasons a lot of companies aren't aware of these is because how different the name is, even though it's the exact same thing. But these also provide for consumer private rights of action, meaning consumers can sue you as well. So you don't have to worry just about the FTC and the FDA and the state attorneys general and your local governance body and state municipality. Consumers can sue as well. And Helen noted some of those penalties at the federal level. They're smaller at the consumer level, but they can still stack the exact same way. And when you run to consumer class actions, you're looking at hundreds or potentially thousands of violations and millions in fines.
Wow. Emilie, thank you, Chad. Before you jump in with the operational, it was just occurring to me, and what I was doing was I want to encourage everyone to try to think about how your current practices fit into this regulatory landscape. And remember, it's complicated, but it's crucial. The role of compliance, but it gives us an opportunity to build consumer trust as well. So while we have a lot of restrictions that Fortune 500 companies take for granted, we have that opportunity. So putting it into practice operationally, I want to throw it to you, Emilie.
Sure. I think the one thing that you just touched on, consumer trust, right? And I think that's something that just especially in the cannabis industry as a whole, we all take pride in. Triple tested. We use UV, CR certs, making sure that we're not using naming conventions that are attractive to children. And I think that's one of the things as an industry that we can hang our hat on as a differentiator. I think what's important to note here as well is at BeneLeaves, we work with a lot of different companies that are just out of state. And so we do a lot of co-packing and white labeling here in Ohio. And what has been fascinating when it comes to just different regulatory compliance from state to state is that it's so inconsistent in a lot of ways where, I mean, to Helen and Chad's point as well, some of this packaging could easily be approved in another state, such as making a claim, this product will make you sleepy. This product could make you feel awake. We're in Ohio, we're totally handicapped from being able to use any of those types of phrasing. And so it does prevent a little bit of an educational gap between us and the consumer because we can't fully express the product's potential and potential effects on the consumer. And so I think that then falls back on us as licensees, as educators ourselves, to go out into the public to, teach people about cannabinoids and terpene profiles, right? And it's not just the high THC percentage products. There's so much more that go into this plant. And so I'm hoping that eventually someday we'll be able to use just a little bit more words and just descriptive language to at least try to explain what certain products can do. And of course, that's going to take more normalization of the medical cannabis community itself and just of the plant medicine itself, which is so important, especially in Ohio, we're seeing this rise of adult use. But it's so incredibly important that we also lift up the medical cannabis program in the same weight, right? The same level to give that, the plant medicine, the normalization that it needs, that we can eventually move into these double-blinded placebo studies and this actual medical research that we can gain to be able to make these claims, right? So to speak, and say, we actually do know that if you take this dose, it'll help with inflammation, it'll help with sleep, it'll help with nausea, versus now, a lot of what we say, and we do work with a lot of different medical professionals here, but, they're what they say and retort, it's like, oh, it's anecdotal, right? We don't have the science and the data to back this up. But that's why I personally, it's a passion thing for me, to really hold up the medical part of this program and the medicinal benefits of the plant. And I think that's something that we, especially at BeneLeaves, try to do with our educational efforts.
Yes, and I applaud the educational efforts and the brands. I mean, the brands who are doing it right are struggling to survive compliance, and budgets are thin. And all the money, a lot of money going toward compliance, the brands, they've got to understand the importance of education. The education is so important, but that from a media perspective, it's good news and the bad news. It's what fills my energy pockets is the opportunity to educate. Now, how do you monetize that as a media company? That's another webinar, but media platforms, they're uniquely positioned to either, uphold or undermine consumer trust. And the consequences to the media companies failing to adhere to the advertising standards are severe. You could lose your license. You could be completely wiped out. I don't know if people remember, it was a wonderful lifestyle platform publisher out of Canada called Civilized. And I thought their content was very, very transparent, honest. It really was consumer friendly, and it was highlighting the lifestyle and how the plant can enrich your life. But I mean, they were in Canada where it was federally legal, and Canada's federal advertising rules were so strict that, I mean, they just couldn't attract enough sponsors or advertisers or media partnerships, because it's tough to balance as a media publisher, myself included. I want to give the brands who are doing it right the visibility. I'd love to open up my platform to advertising, but the rub and why we're not seeing more media companies involved is it's very, very hard to, all the states have the different compliance rules and regulations. You could geo-block, but it just, there's so much exposure. And mainstream media, they're not going to assume that risk. So we're on the heels of over 8 decades of prohibition, which was the whole subject matter in the plant was maligned with miscommunication, and there's going to have to be content that educates, and media companies' hands are somewhat tied. I mean, I'm boldly going where all of us, right? We're all boldly going where no man, woman, they has gone before. So kudos to all of us, but it's tough, and to see the brands educating is invaluable. So Helen and Chad, before we move on to the next topic, I was just wondering if if you could just speak to any advice on how brands can avoid, or even media companies, if someone comes to me with content and I think they have a wonderful product, is there any advice you have on how brands or publishers can avoid unintentional violations with who we target as an audience? Packaging, advertising, especially when, Chad, you mentioned, which kind of scares me to death, that there's these rules and regulations even down to the local level that we might not even be aware of yet.
Quick question to the people that you're doing business with. How do you know this is true? You know, what's your basis for saying this? As simple as that.
Oh, wow.
To add on to Helen's
Wow,
point,
that's good. That's good. See, guys, you gotta get the lawyers. You gotta get the lawyers.
well, and
Go
not
ahead.
to be
That's always the right answer, Maria.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
not to be too cheeky here either, but honestly, the best thing you can do is substantiate your claims. And I promise I didn't even time that with your question onto this slide here. But
Perfect.
this claim substantiation. So when you ask the question, we have a potential consumer protection violation. What goes into it? How do we avoid it? The name of the game and the main thing you want to do is you have to substantiate every single claim you make. So what is claim substantiation? On a very basic level, it is backing up any claims you make with regard to your product. Emilie made a fantastic point when you say this product can help you with sleep or appetite or something to that effect. Those are claims that need to be backed up. As we noted earlier, these apply to all types of claims as well: audio, visual, written, anything. And most importantly, in the cannabis space, they also specifically apply to health claims. Something like this product may help with inflammation. It may help with your appetite. CBD is often advertised as having neuroprotective properties, right? Neurocognitive properties. All of these absolutely have to be supported by health claims, specifically reliable and competent scientific evidence. In order to make a health claim regarding a product, you need reliable and competent scientific evidence. Now, as we noted before, with Maria, you and Emilie talked a bit about this. This is a little tricky under the FTC and FDA, where cannabis has been illegal for almost around like 70, 80 years. So where are all these reliable and competent scientific studies? Thankfully, we're getting a few more with the impending rescheduling and some changes to the Drug-Free Workplace Act, but it's a real problem. So claim substantiation is the #1 way you can avoid these UDAP violations, especially with health claims. You want to make sure you're really on top of them and having every single claim you're making regarding a product, cannabis or otherwise, vetted for substantiation, especially health claims.
Last year,
but I'm sorry. Go ahead, Helen, please.
last year, the FTC really kind of upgraded what's needed and became very specific. And you just can't make these claims very lightly. We're talking about claims that are supported by medical research, and it can't just be one study that you buy and shop a doctor and he says, oh yeah, whatever you want him to say. It's got to be a body of medical research that generally supports what you're saying. They have also indicated that that medical research study has to be supported by random controlled human trials. And so it goes far above just somebody's opinion. And also it has to, it can't include, I think somebody mentioned the anecdotal evidence. You can't be out there saying that something cured your cancer and have 3 or 4 consumers, put their quote up there. Anecdotal evidence is irrelevant when it comes to substantiating a health claim.
It's very frustrating to me, the regulatory game of ping pong, and I don't know where this is going to land. And we'll end with predictions for Schedule 3 if that happens. But the fact that the FDA, the punting it back to Congress, and what will happen with the hemp bill is a whole other story. But we're restricted because we need these peer-reviewed articles. We need this medical research. As you said, we need more than just preclinical trials. But with the FDA stalling on evaluating the efficacy, I mean, of course, they approved it in the pharmaceutical drug Epidiolex, but as a food supplement or vitamin supplement, we're kind of in no man's land. So it's a bit. Listen, this isn't for the faint of heart. We're forging the way, and this is why we need the National Cannabis Industry Association and trade organizations and the advocacy. But I mean,
yeah. And we're seeing now, Maria, we're looking at more of the safety issues, failure, part of a health substantiation claim is making sure that you're identifying what the warnings are. And we saw 3 different state attorneys general, including a whole swath of cases by the California Attorney General, say, with a cannabis related product, you did not indicate what the warnings were, and that's a consumer protection violation. And Emilie, we're seeing a lot of that in the Delta 8, but that goes for all different types of cannabis as well, with regards to providing warnings, and your failure to do that can also be considered a UDAP or a consumer protection violation.
That's a great point. And Maria, to your direct point that you actually just mentioned, the reason we're in no man's land with all of this with regards to foods and beverages is because of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And what this act does is it regulates all ingredients that go into food and beverages. The act basically says, unless the ingredient you're putting in has been peer reviewed and previously established as generally recognized as safe, or GRAS, ironically enough, unless the product has been recognized as GRAS, it has to go through a very, very lengthy prior review process. Now, the issue, of course, here is that CBD has not been previously declared GRAS. So things like CBD foods and beverages, notwithstanding the 2018 hemp bill, can still be illegal under federal law. And actually, we have a question in chat that's on this. Someone is saying that this sounds in line with the supplement industry. While cannabis isn't a supplement, would you say it's similar in terms of claims? So I want to make an important distinction here. You're drawing distinctions between supplements and foods and beverages, which is a distinction in the law. However, when it applies to UDAP violations and consumer protection claims, they're the same. The distinction you're making there between supplements and food and beverages is relevant for the FDA, but with regards to FTC, which applies to all claims made on all products, it's the same. So you do have a little bit more leeway in terms of putting cannabis into something like a supplement, which is not covered by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, doesn't necessarily have to go through the same FDA process, but all those consumer protection issues that we just talked about will apply just as broadly, regardless of whether this is a supplement, it's a food, or really anything like that. Similarly, comparative claims with other products, whether they be supplements, foods, or other cannabis products, also have to be substantiated. You can't say that your product is better, it has more terpenes, or it's full spectrum, whereas the other guys isn't, where that's not true. We talked a little bit about how this applies to CBD and hemp as well, but Helen, you mentioned this very briefly before, but can you talk a little about what the FTC and the FDA have done with their warning letters and some of the issues with non-compliance that can result?
Sure. So what they're trying to do is, knowing that most of y'all out there don't know that these laws exist, they're trying to put you on notice that they do exist. And they did, I think it was a little over 3 years ago, dozens and dozens of letters went out to different CBD products saying, here are what our claim substantiation standards, here are the claims that you've made. And if you continue to make these claims, then you're going to need to have this level of proof. And with all types of claim substantiation, whether it's health related or not, you have to have that substantiation before you make the claim. And so they were just putting them on notice that that's what the law is, and that can actually, if you don't listen to them and then you get caught for a violation, they can actually then show that as an intentional violation, and it can potentially have higher civil penalties.
And if you don't believe Helen, our next slide's going to show you some notable issues in cannabis advertising, so we can substantiate Helen's claim. So can we? Oh, you know what? I apologize, Brian. I was thinking about jumping to the slide that has the high profile companies that did suffer violations. Maybe the next slide. There you
one?
No, maybe the next one. Sorry, guys. Yes. No. Wait. Yes. So
Perfect.
this substantiates, and then we'll go back. This substantiates, yeah. So I knew we had a slide. So the graph to the right shows the amount of warning letters that went out, the number of warning letters that went out to companies beginning in 2014 through 2023. And you can see that after the 2018 Farm Bill passed, and as the CBD market expanded, the regulatory focus on compliance increased. And these are just some examples of companies. Curaleaf, one of the largest cannabis companies in the U.S., they got a double whammy. They received letters from both the FDA and the FTC, and this was for making unsubstantiated claims relating to cancer, Alzheimer's, and chronic pain. We've got, these are, Koi CBD, a very, very good brand, also got hit by both, because, and you'll be hit by both if you make the claim, and then if a publishing company publishes it or runs your ad. So claims that have to do with Alzheimer's, chronic pain, COVID-19, anxiety, PTSD, chronic CTE, head injuries. That one always kills me. If you look at number 3, neuro, because, and Helen and Chad, you could back me on this. This was, when I found out that the federal government was the original patent holder of the cannabinoid CBD, and it was indicated as a neuroprotectant. Now,
Yep.
Yeah, I believe the patent expired around 2020, relatively recently. But how can they hold the patent for the cannabinoid CBD being a neuroprotectant? And that's another conversation. I don't mean to digress, and then say you need to substantiate a claim for a head injury and a condition like CTE. We need a doctor on the panel, because I can't pronounce that second, encephalopathy. There you go. And then there's claims relating to ADHD and Parkinson's disease. And so these warning letters did go out, and there are also fines associated. So I just wanted to... Yeah.
Yeah, Marie. I mean, it's interesting. And to that point, I mean, there have actually been peer-reviewed published studies that show cannabis can have inhibitory effects on the ACE2 receptor, which can lessen the effects of COVID-19 in terms of the effects on. So to your point, we've seen studies on things like anxiety. We've seen chronic traumatic encephalopathy studies.
Inflammation, chronic pain, right?
Oh gosh, inflammation, chronic pain, of course. And I think a large part of it is, as you talked about, the kind of stigma associated with it, this large transition from a law enforcement to a public health policy perspective. In many ways, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and is basically trying to move a mountain.
Yeah, and it keeps everyone who's trying to do good's hands tied. So It is, but we're going to move the mountain. We're going to move the mountain. I don't doubt it. I know it. All right, Emilie, do you have any comments from situations you've run into in with BeneLeaves?
Sure. This has just been great. I'm learning so much already. But honestly, I think I think when it comes to
We're all
just
learning. We need to
we
have Helen
we
and Chad
are.
on speed dial. We need McMurray and Shuster on speed dial. That's number one. Okay, go
I
ahead.
know we should do this every week, you guys. But yeah, no, when it comes to FDA regulation, I think it's incredible that they are not in our business yet. You can see from some of these claims, these letters that are going out, that they're definitely sticking their toes in, if you will, trying to keep an eye on these claims. But it is fascinating to me just how many facilities that we know have seen that are not built out to FDA standard, and they're making edibles, consumables, topicals, things you're putting inside your body and on your body, and they're not taking proper precautionary safety measures just within their facilities. That is one of the things that we pride ourselves on. Just within our facility, where we were built out for an FDA regulatory standard from day one. So that is something that we like to just talk about, because it's incredibly important. And yeah, so I just wanted to touch on that. It's fascinating, but I do think that in the next probably 3 to 5 years, and correct me if I'm wrong, Helen and Chad, I do believe the FDA will be definitely in our business. And I know in Ohio as well that they're going to start sending out agents specifically to look in on facilities. I believe they're going to be representatives from the Department of Ag, I believe. Okay, I see nodding. I think that's, yeah. I wanted to make sure I got that department correct, but yeah, that they are going to start making, trips and visits to these facilities and checking in on FDA standards and the build out. So I think that's incredibly important. I think as an industry, we need to embrace that, because that then further normalizes and legitimizes our industry, especially if we're saying, look, this is, medicinal, this is medicine. We have these beautiful facilities, safe, tested. I think that all helps our cause.
And I see that. Thank you. Thank you so much. I see that we're moving on to a topic that our poll was very interested in, social media. But I just want to ask one thing before we move on to the social media. I mean, this is just the very general. I just some little tips from media. I would you say, would all of you agree? I mean, the only way I think we can effectively market, or I try to effectively market cannabis and CBD products without crossing into the territory of health claims. I try to produce content that's focused on lifestyle, education, and the quality of the product. And I think that also segues into some good best practices for social media. But do you guys all find that those are, health claims? It's hard. So lifestyle education and the quality of the product, would those be pretty safe territory to focus your content on?
Yes, but if you're making claims, for example, about the quality of your products, you may need to have scientific proof of that. So
all right,
it makes it very challenging. Yeah.
So that it's forcing us. The universe is forcing us to education. We need to educate. We need to educate. All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So moving on to social media. I'll have Helen, and social media advertising. We all know the challenges it presents. And I'm always worried about when it comes to influencers promoting cannabis products or even my platform. So it's balancing visibility with compliance again. The FTC endorsement guide speaks to that. It requires all paid partnerships and endorsements to be fully disclosed. But I'm going to hand it over to Helen and Chad because they're the experts on this.
So first off, everything that Chad and I have said applies in social media. And it's not an excuse that on an Instagram post, it's too few characters for you to put in all of your disclosures and your health warnings. If you can't fit in what's required, then you don't do it. So you take your job, Maria, with advertising, and it just becomes all that more difficult when you're doing it in a space that is tiny, and that includes things like text messages as well. So the Federal Trade Commission has a comprehensive endorsement guideline, and its main purpose is that when you have somebody providing your product with an endorsement, the consumer needs to know that. And there are a variety of different words and phrases and things that are used, but that's the overall gist of it. And it's transparency. They want to know that person's either getting paid for it, perhaps they're getting free product, or they're getting some type of reciprocal advertising elsewhere, or anything of value has got to be disclosed. And Chad can talk to you a little more about the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Helen noted, you have some basic things, the fact that there's an endorsement, the fact how much things cost, if they're being compensated, all of that has to be noted. But what's really kind of deadly for businesses here, and what they may not realize too, is that the influencer is essentially speaking on your behalf. They're speaking as a representative of your business. If they make a health claim that you have not authorized them to under a principle known as apparent authority, your business can still be held liable for that. If they say something that you didn't say was permissible, it's not in the script, and they go off the rails and you don't take action to correct it, your business can still be held liable. So, a lot of companies will see influencers as this amazing avenue to a new market of consumers, which is absolutely true. But sometimes that avenue to that market is by playing fast and loose with the rules to maybe seem a bit more hip and young or flexible or whatever. It's really, really important that you treat these the exact same as any traditional marketing and advertising material that you put out there, because a violation of these guidelines or of any of the FTC's regulations fall under that exact same umbrella of a UDAP violation. So you violate this, you're looking at a violation of one of those.
Yeah, and conversely, the endorser is liable for false claims that she just happens to repeat because she was told. So again, ask people, how do you know this is true? Before you say anything.
And if you enter into a contract with an influencer and ask for indemnification, they don't have the authority to indemnify you, right? Is that correct?
They can, but 9 times out of 10, they have no money to indemnify you with.
Yep.
Definitely put it in your contract, but more often than not, especially after paying the attorney's fees for the lawsuit that the FTC has filed against you, there's nothing left.
Wow. Well, wow. I mean, I think the $164,000 question or the $420,000 question couldn't resist. Emilie, and I could speak to this too. So aside from the content restrictions, on top of it, you've got the FTC on your back, the FDA, but these platforms will just close your account. We've all lost Instagram, Facebook accounts. It's devastating. So do you have any tips navigating, Emilie, on navigating the different platforms, platform-specific restrictions and opportunities? And one thing that really galls me is I don't understand the inconsistency of how they apply it. I mean, I've lost Instagram accounts because I put a photograph of a hemp leaf, and then I see other brands who have people taking bong rips. It just seems very inconsistent. But Emilie, could you speak to that maybe about, navigating the different restrictions and the different platforms, or which platform? I believe you guys are on Instagram, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on. The most consistent thing in this industry is the inconsistency, especially when it comes to marketing and advertising, right? I mean, we've had just throughout my career in cannabis in general, I've had a handful of accounts shut down for various reasons. And, of course, you try to fight it and say, hey, for wording, for imagery, I mean, the list goes on, right? I think one of the most successful things that I've done with just the various companies that I've worked for is humanizing your brand. Those human connections, personalizing, getting out into the world and educating face to face. I'm very passionate about outreach and education. Setting up at your local library and just talking about the basics. This is cannabis. This is a cultivator. This is a processor. This is a dispensary. Not making claims, but more so saying this is a potential option for you that sort of thing. But it's incredibly difficult and frustrating. I mean, Facebook is a whole nother monster. We don't even touch that anymore. I know Twitter, now X, has alleviated and been a lot more flexible with different terminology and imagery. So we've seen some success as far as the ROI in using that specific platform. But Instagram specifically, I mean, it's a monster. You know, we've managed to find a nice balance just with the cadence of our posting and the content in which we're posting. But I am curious though, to look into other platforms such as TikTok, where we are seeing these 30-second short videos that are, you know, there and gone in a flash, where I do believe a lot of these companies, especially on the intoxicating hemp side of things, are really taking advantage of this advertising. But of course, that's a whole other conversation for a different day with what they're able to get away with as far as their advertising. But it is fascinating. I think always err on the side of caution, especially when it comes to imagery and wording and different phrasing. So Instagram has worked for us, but again, I think bottom line at the end of the day is creating those human connections, getting out into your you know, your communities, even working with your local governments, your legislators, and educating and getting out there and really being a positive force for the community.
Yes, and a shout out. I saw on the chat that Janessa Stark, the Janessa Stark Agency, is on. She is an amazing, amazing. Just got to give this shout out because she takes it very seriously with CBD and cannabis clients. She's a fractional marketing expert. She's a content strategist, and she's putting in the time to really try to do her due diligence in clients from this classification. I think what you said about humanizing it, I just ditto. I mean, I think you have to think about what are the goals and objectives of social media. Don't buy into all the hype. I mean, yes, we want it's the balancing act of the visibility with the compliance. Social media is a great tool, but maybe not for the cannabis or hemp, or maybe just to build goodwill. I mean, you have to think about building it organically, and you have to think about the cost benefit analysis of that. And many people drop off and just give up on Facebook. I mean, there are cases like Miss Grass. That would be a great one to look at as an example. She's done some very interesting lifestyle content and been able to build a big following. But, you know, to build it organically is low and slow. It's very costly. To pour, we've all burned through tens of thousands of dollars, I'm sure, on trying to build it and boost ads and then getting some traction and losing our account. So what's the goal and objective of the platform you're looking at? And, you know, use it, you know, as organically, maybe as a way for education. But I think a very simple rule of thumb is, you know, focus on authentic engagement, you know, clear disclosures, to parrot what Helen and Chad have been saying, and educational content. You know,
I wanted to add real quick that
yeah,
LinkedIn has also been incredible for us as far as getting out just pure education content and really you know, promoting brand awareness. I just wanted to make sure I said that too, because between Instagram and LinkedIn's been fabulous. So I just wanted to make sure I threw that out there.
And Brian, maybe you could just real quickly, ever so quickly, we put together a slide of some successful cannabis social media campaigns. Not that one. It's the next one, I believe, or the previous one. Oh yes, no, it is that one. I'm sorry. You are right. I'm sorry. So successful ones you could look at are Screen Be Life. I'm not gonna lie, I've lost accounts. We're always rebuilding. We're not allowed to boost ads. Sometimes we're in Facebook jail, sometimes we're not. Good luck figuring it out. Charlotte's Web did a good job. Men did a decent job. But where to get them? I don't know. Green Thumb, Baked Brothers, Kiva, love Kiva. But we, you know, it's an investment. It's an investment to build your brand loyalty, to educate the consumer trust, the educational content. All right. So,
Bria,
yeah.
I see a lot of it for folks who have backed off of social media, moving to texting platforms.
Oh.
Yeah. And the laws about texting were very, very challenging and difficult before, but they're completely changing in January of next year. And so I wanted to alert anybody who, if they're using these texting platforms, that you just don't want to be doing it without having someone who knows texting laws look at it. And you know, we're already seeing class action lawsuits against cannabis companies for this. And you know, if you hire someone to do it, you don't even know what they're doing, say, you're still liable for their actions. You're responsible for those vendors. Chad, I know you can talk a little bit about it if you're still here. Maybe I got disconnected there.
It was a great segue, and I'm just going to let everybody know we've got about 10 minutes left, and people were interested in IP and branding. So let's definitely have Chad address and thank you, Helen, we're going to touch on the texting and the calling, and then I think we could hop to the IP if that's okay, based on the poll and what people are interested in.
Sure.
Perfect. So really quick, the last thing I'll say on the texting and calling is often this is not something a lot of cannabis companies are aware of. There are two separate laws, the TCPA and TSR, which regulate it. These provide for fines of anywhere from $500 to $1,500 per call or text. And they also can result in criminal fines if you're not properly registered, which is pretty wild. There are two things that are bipartisan issues. One is liking cannabis and one is not liking telemarketers, apparently. But to illustrate this, really, the most instructive case, health marketer Visalis, they made approximately 2 million robocalls in a 2-month period, and they were hit with a judgment for $2 billion with a B dollars. They actually appealed to the United States Supreme Court, arguing under the 8th Amendment it was cruel and unusual, which the court didn't buy, but I love the argument. And they got it reduced to a much more reasonable $925 million penalty for 2 months of calling. So cannabis businesses should absolutely get these practices audited, still within the consumer protection realm.
Wow. And then we're gonna go past the making green environmental claims, but it just comes down to making health claims, making any claims. It comes down to what Helen said. Where'd the information come from? Is it true? Substantiate it. Substantiate it.
Yeah.
Greenwashing. Don't be saying you're, eco-conscious or environmental or treat green claims. Would you say, Helen and Chad, with the little bit of time we have, the way you would treat with substantiating health claims?
Those are things that trigger greater scrutiny. So if you're going to make them, and I know some brands are
really?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you've got a specific federal law that applies just to green claims. If you're not reading that law and complying with it, you are asking for trouble.
Oh, gee. Okay. All right. Well, you cut right to it, Helen. I don't know. I hope you don't bill hourly because you really are you're the most succinct, I tell you. All right. Her knowledge and Chad's is a bargain at twice the price. I'm just saying that. And I mean that. I can substantiate that. Okay. So IP protections and branding.
Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know this is a topic a lot of people want to talk about, mostly because of the uncertainty surrounding it. So right away, trademarks and IP protections for cannabis are limited. I know a lot of people are probably wondering, can I trademark a specific product, a specific plant, a specific formulation? Unfortunately, not. What you can
How about a strain? How about a strain?
So there are some, this is an interesting question because there are some arguments and some patents showing that ungerminated cannabis seeds, which technically do not qualify as cannabis, they're ungerminated, they don't have any THC. Some suggestions that those can be patented. The actual strain coming from that seed, however, cannot. Almost think of how Monsanto can patent certain types of seeds. But not necessarily the product that comes from it. What you do with the product is up to you. So you can almost kind of copyright or patent that genealogy. What a lot of companies are patenting, however, are novel design processes. So I was speaking with a processor a couple weeks ago, actually, who was coming up with this new process for extraction methods and had questions on whether it was patentable. And because it's broadly applicable, not just to something like cannabis, it is. Another trick that I'm seeing a lot of companies do is in order to actually get trademarks and copyrights on some of their products or things that they might be using, they form tangential goods such as t-shirts, hats, apparel, and then they trademark the brand on that apparel.
Is that
So
called like expanding your zone to federally legal products? What is it? What
that's
is
certainly what it
zone
is.
of
So
okay.
this is certainly what it is. But the trick there is take a similar brand, apply it to something federally legal, and then at the very least, you're protecting your IP rights and preserving those rights in the interim.
That's important. That's important. All right. Well, Emilie, do you have has BeneLeaves been trying to protect any processes or intellectual property or operational considerations?
We are pretty open. I think it's unique just in the Ohio industry right now where we're so much in our infancy that I think we really try to capitalize on the fact that we can share, it's information sharing, it's having the dialogue, because really we're all in the same boat, especially when it comes to the Ohio regulatory nuance, right? And so I think yes, we all have our own specific ways of doing things and, like, yes, this is our pudding, right? But I think in generality, when you extrapolate that out, we're all kind of going through the same thing, especially in Ohio. So we really try to get out and just, converse with the network and just have those dialogues within each other to really understand pressure points and just different commonality to really try to push our industry forward. But yeah, that would be my answer for that. I think Ohio is probably unique in that way so far, but I think it's also a great opportunity for us to work together and really learn from each other what's working and what's not.
Sure. I have a question to Helen and Chad, and then I think we have to just wrap up. So, in terms of the hemp farm bill and CBD products within the legal limits of THC, I mean, is it federal? Can you get a federal trademark? I know you can get state trademarks on some things, but can you get a federal trademark? Is it federally on a gummy, for instance? So, even though the hemp and the CBD is federally legal if it has less than 3%, the fact that it is now in a gummy, and the FDA hasn't ruled on that. It's kind of a non-legal form of a federally legal product. Can you get federal trademark protection if you're building a gummy brand, for instance?
So the short answer is no there, Maria, and it's for a reason that you touched on though. You're doing a federally legal product in a federally illegal way. And ultimately, that's what it would come down to. If you're putting it into a gummy, something that has not been recognized as grass under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, you're running into issues with it still being a technically illegal product, which is why there's a lot of health and safety concerns out there around some of these intoxicating hemp products that, unlike someone like BeneLeaves, who Emilie talked about how they're pretty open. They have more tours a day than anyone I've seen. They will let anybody view anything. It's like Willy Wonka's in there. It's fantastic. But we're seeing these other issues that are really kind of impacting. So it's still in flux. They haven't ruled definitively. There have been no patent office rulings on it definitively. But I would say no for the fact that it's still an illegal form of a legal product.
Well, Emilie, you've got the right approach because, wrap it up. We're going to succeed collectively as a group. We have to, have each other's backs, or we're going to all fail individually. So people drawn to this space are phenomenal, and it's going to take a village. Helen and Chad and Emilie, just quickly, any Schedule 3 predictions? And then we're going to just open it up to a Q&A. I realize we're 5 minutes over. If any of the panelists have to leave, if anyone who joined us today had to go, thank you so much for joining us. Follow up, hit people up with emails, and we'll open it up to questions, and if anyone is inspired to give any Schedule 3 predictions.
I'm going to say this because I'm a baby boomer, and I think that once Schedule 3 goes through, that it's going to take another generation to get things really where they need to be. It'll keep moving forward, but the the people with whom I do business at the legislature and the regulatory agencies who are still, in charge of all of this, don't want it, don't like it, don't want to smell it on the street. And so they're going to keep dragging their feet, and you're going to have to wait till you get the next generation to come in and really
Even
make
with
a
the
huge stride.
potential tax dollars. I mean, you saw
They
the
don't
other,
care.
you
They
saw
don't
it with
care.
tobacco. They don't care.
It doesn't work. They don't want to smell it. They don't care about the money. It's really, it's amazing how unmoving they are.
Wow. Well,
I tend to take a similar viewpoint, actually. I mean, despite the public perspective, I think there are a lot of public policy concerns, namely the health, certain concerns with high THC cannabis that haven't been fully sussed out yet. And I think a lot of the fears are probably overblown, but I just don't think that we know enough yet. In segueing there, there's a question. Will Schedule 3 be a watershed moment needed to move the industry forward? I think it'll kind of be the next major stop, to Helen's point. I'm not sure it'll take a full generation, but somewhere around like 10 to 15 years maybe for full legalization, I think is potentially feasible. What Schedule 3 will do is it's going to completely separate the medical and non-medical aspects, and everything medical. I mean, you're going to get 280E deductions, or you're going to be able to take deductions under the tax code. You're going to get access to FDIC insured banks. You won't have to use credit unions. You'll have full access to social media and advertising. So Schedule 3 will be a watershed moment for the medical side. Recreational, adult use, non-medical, it's going to still be tough for a couple years, but as you see in this industry, it always moves forward. We haven't moved back ever since this really started with Proposition 215, I think, in California back in like the 90s. It's always been forward momentum. So it will be a watershed moment, but there's still work to be done.
genie's out of the bottle. The train's left the station. 2 out of 3.
Precisely.
2 out of 3 Americans want it. So it's,
Yep.
gun control and marijuana. It just blows my mind. There's 3 bipartisan issues that the majority of the country, no matter what side you're on, agree on, and that's kind of abortion, gun control, and marijuana. So, more nugs, less guns. I don't, why? We're going to get there, everybody. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. So I appreciate the panelists for staying. Yes. No, Brian, I was just going to thank the panelists for staying over. And go ahead, Brian, I'm going to throw it to you.
No, you're good. I honestly wanted to just acknowledge Helen while she was still on the line before she dropped. She did have a hard stop at the end of the hour, so I really appreciated Helen being able to join us and contribute to the Q&A section as well. Chad, you did a fantastic job of organically incorporating that open Q&A section into the Schedule 3 segment here. So honestly, yeah, I mean, I think we can start to wind down here. So audience members, if you do have any additional questions, don't hesitate to post them to the chat room now or the live Q&A board, either or. I think all the panelists here still have a few minutes. And if you want to dive into any of the subjects that we might have had to breeze over, or that you wanted us to dive into a little bit more deeply, that's totally fine as well. We're going to close out today. I've loved to close out the recent webinars over the last few months, in particular, the ones led by the committees, with a final thought from each of the panelists. I'd love to learn more about your experience with advocacy associations, in particular with NCIA. I'll be a little jealous there, but I will say that all of you all have been absolute fantastic committee members over the last term, as well as previously. So I'd love for all of you all just to leave the audience with a little bit more knowledge about your experience with NCIA, how it has benefited your business, and where you see your involvement with industry advocacy on both the regional and federal levels going from here now that you are more actively involved with groups like NCIA. And Emilie, just since you're top of mind, you were a fantastic in-person participant at last week's Ohio Stakeholder Summit, and you really reinforced a lot of the points that you made on the panel here today. So I'll turn it over to you to be a fantastic ambassador for your experience with NCIA over the last few years.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think we met all of you during your last stakeholder event, which would have been probably about 5-ish years ago. And I was just super impressed just with the organization as a whole then. I will say one of my favorite things to do with NCIA has been Lobby Days, which is coming up in May. So if the people who are on the call, please reach out to us. It's an incredible experience to be able to have your voice heard. And state, local levels, talk to your legislators, get out, do lobbying, educate, because it is really amazing the lack of education, just back to the basics. And these are folks that are making, big decisions for us in our industry. So I will say, get out there, your voice matters. You matter, and be loud and educate. So that will be my sign off here. So thank you all so much for having me today. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Emilie, for being such a fantastic ambassador and industry innovator for us, not only in Ohio, but also on the national level. I'm very much looking forward to the BeneLeaves contingent that's going to be coming out next year to join us in DC in May. So Chad, why don't we turn it over to you, and feel free to speak for Helen since she's not here a little bit if you'd like to as well.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, I mean, NCIA has been absolutely fantastic. Maria touched on it a little bit like at the beginning, but in an industry that in many regards is so disparate and so ad hoc and all over the place, having such a centralized body where we can all come together and, like Emilie said, push through this together is really been a blessing. I mean, it's hard enough in the industry. It's hard enough when you're doing it on your own. So to actually have a reliable group of people who are put on unbelievably fantastic events. I had such a blast last week and really learned a lot. It's been critical to our success and also really our access to the cannabis industry. So thank you for that very much.
Yeah, absolutely. It really goes to show the sort of network that you can quickly link into by joining NCIA, joining the committees, and really having these like-minded conversations like we're doing right now. Emilie, I thought you touched on such a good point at your intro as well, of talking about how when you got involved in the industry, you thought that your journey to this place was so unique, and you found that, as you've made your way through this, that you share so many similar experiences with other members across the country as well. And Chad, I was very much appreciative of Maria's supplementary question at the beginning of the call about how long you've been teaching that course. I really appreciate your work as a pioneer on the education front, and look forward to hearing more about the actual perception and the reception of your students from that course over this semester.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Maria, you've done an absolutely fantastic job moderating this conversation.
Look at the panel. Look at
Yeah.
the panel. Come on. And look at
Your
the
media,
association.
yeah, your
Look at the
media
association.
experience really shined through. So I really appreciate you proposing this topic, working with the panelists over the last few months to get this developed and presented today. So I'll turn it over to you for your final thought on what your experience with NCIA and the program's been so far.
I can't say enough about the NCIA, given all of the limitations we just talked about. It's the one place we can come together. And as I said, we're going to succeed collectively or we're going to all fail individually. And so to have a hub, to have a place, to have like-minded pioneers, we have to stick together. I can't steal this, but an interesting, wonderful resource, Jean Sullivan from ArcView, she always warns me in the media space and in anything in the cannabis space. She says, Maria, pioneers, you got to be careful. Pioneers get shot and the settlers get the gold. Well, we're not going to have that happen. We're going to get the gold and the green. But what we have to stick together, and the NCIA provides this centralized, safe meeting place, and there's strength in numbers. And what Helen said, you know what she said? She said it's going to take a generation. I kind of agree with that. Chad, more optimistic, 5 to 10 years. It'll be moved along. How far down the needle will move, I'm not sure. But with organizations like the NCIA, and if we all come together and have a place to have a unified voice, what Helen was saying was that they don't care. The legislators couldn't be less interested. They don't like the way it smells. The majority of their constituents want it. So I really think you need organizations and participation in organizations like the NCIA to drive the messaging to the majority of the constituents who are going to decide who that these legislators don't care because their constituents haven't made their wanting it known. And the constituents have to be educated. They have to know what the issues are. They have to know what the issues are going to a black market or a legacy dispensary versus a licensed one, or working with a brand that's triple lab tested. They have to understand the issues so that they can know how they impact them. Once we personalize and humanize it and people understand how it impacts them, then they'll start making noise. And when those legislators hear that noise, will maybe Chad, hopefully it will be 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
But you need, I'm trying to cross the mainstream media divide with all of these advertising and compliance and restrictions and limitations, and the way that this subject is targeted and restricted. We need to be involved. We need to get under one umbrella. We need to join the NCIA. We need to make our voices heard. They give you an opportunity to make your voices heard. I don't like the smell either, personally. I never smoked it, but I couldn't be a greater advocate. And I've come to like the smell, by the way. But I'm a convert. It was a medical issue. I take tinctures, I take capsules, and I'm learning. And I look forward to understanding, why would you smoke it? I understand the recreational value, but medicinally, I'd like to know more. I'd like to see those research studies. So we have to remove the barriers. This is the only game in town, guys. The National Cannabis Industry Association. It is the trade association, and we're at such an exciting time because we have an opportunity. I'm going to end with this, necessity is the mother of invention. So we don't enjoy a lot of the advertising and marketing freedoms that Fortune 500 companies take for granted. But that's going to force us to be better because we're still getting the visibility, being within the lines of these distorted, inconsistent laws. So, NCIA, I can't thank you enough. This is an organization. I submitted a blog, and here I am talking to you today. They will empower. They will empower you. They will empower your voice. They'll give you a voice, and we need all the voices we can get. So that's it. So vote. Know the issues. Know how they impact you, and vote based on your value system. That's what I got. And thank you, NCIA, and thank you, everybody, for joining today and for our panelists. Brian, back to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. You touched on so many points. I was trying to take bullet point notes of all the ones to reinforce, but
my husband.
I really appreciate you. You touched on so many of the takeaways from today's conversation, as well as some of the larger takeaways that we try and instill in our members across the board. One of the most powerful and impactful discussion topics at our Ohio Stakeholder Summit last week was Ohio State Representative Juanita Brent talking about her experiences having BeneLeaves open the door for her, and how it really transformed her understanding of who is in the industry, what it means to be a responsible business owner. And her takeaway for the audience was, the elected officials are only accountable to you all. And if you don't go and make your voice heard in your state legislature, at your county meetings, at your town council meetings, then they don't know. And the only way that we're going to change that one generation timeline to the more optimistic 10 to 5 years that Chad has is if we do empower ourselves to have a voice and to go to these areas and to go to the halls of power and to put a face to the industry so that we can get our real pressing issues not only passed, but for real substantive progress to be made on them. Strength in numbers, power in progress has been our tagline for our cannabis industry lobby days for the last few years. So I really do hope that all of you all that are still here on the call and that are watching the recording, mark your calendars for May 13th through 15th of next year. Plan to join all of us, hundreds of cannabis industry business owners from across the country for our 13th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days. Last year's Lobby Days coincided with the rescheduling announcement that was being made. So we're usually at a good time, at a great time to be in DC, and we couldn't be more excited for the potential that we see to actually have some movement on Section 280E and safe banking access and some of our other key legislative issues that we've been working on for so long. So I really appreciate all of the audience members for your all's active participation in today's call. I also want to make a quick and huge shout out to all the sponsors, supporters, and participants of our Stakeholder Summit series that has been going on throughout the fall. As I mentioned multiple times, our most recent stop was in Columbus, Ohio last Thursday for our Ohio Stakeholder Summit. And we're going to be closing out this fall series in sunny Southern California next week at the Andaz West Hollywood, October 24th. So if you do want to have one more in-person NCIA educational experience and you do find yourself in the California region next week, make sure to head to NCIA's website to secure your spot before they're gone. And then thank you all once again just for joining us today for this insightful session on cannabis marketing compliance. A huge thank you to all of our panelists as well as our moderator, Maria, for expertly navigating us through so many different areas. As she did mention, there is an accompanying blog post to today's fantastic webinar. So head on over to our Industry Insights blog to dive a little bit more deeper, and don't hesitate to reach out to any of the panelists through the contact information that you saw on that last slide. Final point is that all of you all as audience members will get a PDF format of today's presentation as well. So make sure to follow the contact information that you saw on that last slide, like, subscribe, and follow all of these amazing panelist channels, and send in those connection requests on LinkedIn. With that, thank you all again to our expert panelists, all of you all for participating. Stay informed, stay engaged, and together, let's continue to elevate the cannabis industry. We'll see you all for another Industry Essentials educational webinar, and see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.